So if you see in our initialization, there is something called first run. So this is first run. This is again a sequence. And after first run, we have init all applications. Okay, so let's check with few things. In the init, we'll have first run and init all applications. And in first run, we'll have init all settings. So again, whatever I'm writing, these are the sequences. And all these are sequence names. Okay. Now, in init all settings, this is mainly used only to initialize config. So all the preloaded activities or all the preloaded paths and all will be initialized in init all settings. In the first run, we will write, or in the same sequence, we will add to be executed only once in the complete program execution. So what is the difference between init all settings and init all applications? So if you see here, this is first run and this is init all applications. So inside first run, you have init all settings, and below that we are trying to write something. But what is the difference between init all settings and init all applications? Srinip is saying configuration init all settings. Okay. What is init all applications? Okay. See here. If you observe carefully, init all settings is in the first run. It means that it will be executed only once. But init all applications, since it is not in first run, whenever this init workflow is invoked, for example, when this will be invoked at one state. Whenever there is a system exception or whenever there is a application failure, it will reinitialize, and at that point of time it should reopen all the applications. For example, if we are trying to work with calculator, or if you are trying to work with UiPath web app, now after 5 items the application failed and the application crashed and it's closed. Now do you need to recheck with all the config values, or do you just need to reopen the website? What you need to do? Do you need to read the config everything again, or do you just need to reopen the application?
Reopen the application.
So do you need to read the config sheet, Lalita?
No, only once. First run, you have mentioned first run. Only once it will be done. Once it is done, We'll only open the applications.
Yeah, so here init all applications, write code to open any application that we use in project. Okay, so read range where this will go. So will read range go to init first run? Read
Init
range,
application.
it's not application because you will not read range every time there is an
Oh,
error.
so
It will be
yeah,
read only once.
correct.
Okay, next, picking one row. Where do we pick one row? It's not in init all applications. Getting transaction data will pick one row. Okay, so if you just go back and see, so getting transaction data, after initialization, it is getting one transaction data. So what is the output from transaction data? What is the output from get transaction data? I'm asking by default.
Transaction item. Queue item.
It's a queue item or it's a transaction item.
Right.
And what is the state of transaction item once it is called?
In progress.
Which is in progress state. Okay, so this particular item will pick. Now display message, where should we add this code? We should add this in process state. Okay, so again in process transaction state, we have something called exception handling. So if you go back and see in process transaction, okay, new ReFramework has set transaction status at 3 stages. Okay, now it will have set transaction status. Okay, now if whenever there is a display error, then this will fail. Then this will result in two things, that is system exception or business rule exception. So again, set transaction status is called at two places. So after system exception also you need to set a transaction status. After business rule exception also you need to set a transaction status. So this is how the code is structured. So in the interview, if someone asks you where do we have set transaction status, then what is the answer? Just type in our chat. Where do you set a transaction status? Answer is process transaction. This is correct. This is correct. So this is wrong. Queue status is wrong because there is no such activity or there is no such value as queue status. Yes, this is correct. So let's go back. Now, in the end process, let's assume that we need to kill something or we need to close something. close our application. Will be in end process. Okay, so if you observe carefully, how many states do we have? Init, get transaction data, process, and end process. How many states do we have? So these are the interview questions.
4.
Now, the movement between two states. For example, after initiation, it can go into two states, get transaction and system exception. So this particular item is called transition line. Okay. Altogether, how many transition lines we will have? Let's see. From initiation to how many states? Get transaction data and end process. Data and process. How many do we have here at initiation? 2 lines. So whenever this is completed, so if you observe successful properties, when there is no system exception. So here what is system exception? System exception is a variable like DD transaction data. System exception is also a variable. This is different. This is system exception sequence. Here if system exception variable is nothing. So if it is nothing, then go to get transaction status. So if system exception status is not nothing, then go to end process. It just meant that okay, there is no exception that happened in the initiation state. Okay, if you go back into UiPath, see here system exception is not nothing, and here system exception is nothing. So after completion of this, it will check for these two if conditions. If any of the if condition goes to true, then it will go to the next step. So from get transaction data, so what is the primary activity of get transaction data? What is the primary activity of get transaction data? Now we have 15 minutes more. We need to close it. Make it fast. Get transaction item, get queue item, get transaction item one by one. So get queue item or get transaction item. See here, output get transaction data. We'll get only one item to process. Okay. Here get transaction data. So the main activity of get transaction data is get one item to process. Okay, now here it goes. So what is the output of get transaction data, or something that need to be observed is transaction item. So if transaction item is nothing. So if transaction item is nothing, can we proceed further or can we work further? For example, if there are 10 items and I am trying to get the 11th item, so the transaction item will be nothing. Okay. Now, is it necessary to process it? So when there is no data to process, then obviously we'll go to end process state again. Okay. If transaction item is not nothing, it may just mean that we have some data, so we are processing with process state. So we went to get transaction data, we try to get one item, but from here I did not get any item, so there is no need to process. I'll end the process. And from initiation there is an error, I cannot proceed further, I'm ending the process. But if there is any new item, I can go to process transaction state, and if you can observe, process transaction result of the process transaction can be either three things: success, business rule exception, or system exception. Okay, so for three different options we have three different flows. Let's see it one by one. From process transaction, there are three transition lines. If first it will go into this in the same sequence. If system exception is nothing and business rule exception is nothing. So if both are nothing, can we say that the transaction is successful? If there is no system exception, if there are no exceptions, can we say that the transaction is successful? Okay, so in our case, it just try to write the result. It will go to get transaction data. Because it is successful, it will go to fetch next item. Okay, next, if we have BRE is not nothing, so when we say BRE, is it a custom error or is it a application error? When we say BRE, business rule exception,
Custom error.
so custom error is something that we have built, right?
Yes.
So do we need to reinitialize everything?
No. It
So,
will go to the get transaction.
so we are just getting to the next item, transaction data, to fetch next item. Okay, now if system exception is nothing, so what exactly will happen?
Then it will go back to the init state.
Go to init state, and will the first run execute this time?
No,
Why?
because
We
It
already
will
have.
run only one time. Yes.
So other than saying run only one time, you can say that config we are having some value in it. The config is already initialized. Okay.
Yes.
Go to init and initialize all applications. Okay. So now, how many transitions do we have in ReFramework?
7.
1, 2 from init, 2 from get transaction data, 3 from process state. There is also one more state, that is end process. So how many transition lines do we have from end process state? If you see end process, there are transition lines coming into it. Do you have transition lines going out of end process?
No.
So if this is the final state, after this program will not execute. Okay, so that is the reason we don't have any transition lines. Okay, did you get the required details from here or not? Everything? So other than this, ReFramework is not having anything else. Okay, it has only 4 states and 7 transitions. You can just apply the logic, come back, init starts in the
Kiran,
beginning. Yeah, tell me.
a retry scope, can you little elaborate?
It's not, retry scope will be there in BRE or system exception. We'll check it later. System exception. Okay, it's
Okay.
again in this exception, open workflow. Retry scope will be available in system exception sequence. Okay, we'll
Yeah,
check it.
I was little confused because we have retry scope for queue item also and we have in config also.
Yeah. So maybe we can just add few points for retry scope. Here inside process transaction, set transaction, system exception. So first we'll check for business rule exception. If there is no business rule exception, then we'll check for system exception. Just remember that. Okay. So before setting the transaction status or in the system exception, there will be an option for us to retry. Okay. So in ReFramework, there are 2 places where we can set a retry. First one is orchestrator queue. The second one is config sheet. Okay. If we are having orchestrator queue item as transaction item, okay, then retry number in config sheet will be ignored. Okay, so what it exactly meant? So ReFramework, is it required, or are we using ReFramework only to use transaction items from Orchestrator, or can this be used for any kind of item like um, like data rows and list of items? Can we use ReFramework for them or not?
We can use.
So if we are using anything other than orchestrator queue, then if you want to retry, then config sheet retry is what we are going to use, but for now let's ignore it. And orchestrator queue item. So while setting or while creating a new queue, we will set retries. So if we go back, so here you can see here number of retries, auto retry. You can set as many retries you want. Okay, just as
Vajrang, is retry mandatory?
so retry is there by default. If you want to use, you can use. It's not mandatory.
Okay.
Okay.
Can we put 0
If you
in
just
place of that?
uncheck this one, this is 0.
In config file?
Yeah, in config file as well as while creating a queue item, you can just uncheck this auto retry, then it will be 0.
Okay.
Okay. So those are the only two places there where we can set the transaction status, nowhere else. Okay, let's continue further and let's write our code in ReFramework. Let's see how we can take it. So init all settings, this sequence. So do we need to set the transaction number again while using ReFramework?
No.
ReFramework queues not required, so we just need to read the range. So where the range is available, it will be in first run. In the first run, after killing all the process, I'll just add the code. Okay, so this is where we have it. Save it. Now we need to add items to orchestrator queue. So data input. Where do we need to write queue name? I'm just removing everything from here. Control minus. So we are having only first name. Okay. Now in the config sheet, data config sheet, here we need to mention what is the queue name. If you can see here, this is ABC process ABC queue. All I can do is I can create a new sheet or new name. So flowchart ReFramework. So sample queue, or you can say I can create my own name. June ReFramework sample. Okay. Queue. Just see I'm writing with a camel case, and I will decide or will check with unique references, store in encrypted format. All these details we'll see while we are working with Orchestrator. But here, let's add it to this place. So this is where we will add our Orchestrator queue name. So other than this, there is nothing that we need to do. So how can we get the queue name? Now we read all the values. We need to send it to Orchestrator. So there are two ways. First one is bulk add queue items. So data table. What is the data table that we are getting out of it? DT transaction data. And the queue name is. So all the details that are available in config sheet will be available in config variable. Config of, I just need to give the key name, orchestrator queue name dot toString. Let's have a breakpoint over here. Okay, save it, and then debug. So I am not continuing or I'm not adding everything. We are just adding out only till bulk add queue items. So let's see what exactly is happening inside. Execute this one. Let's see. Output. I think for the first time this is creating a library. Let's wait. Step into. Okay, I'll just close and reopen this again. GitHub. Show in Explorer. Let's hope the code should be there. I'm not even sure. Okay, init. Yeah, we have the code. Let's debug. Okay. Output. So if you observe things carefully, it's trying to completely do all the activities. I should close this one, save it and close, and retry. Okay. Now, if you see in the output, local. So these are the variables, or these are the global variables. Okay. So DT transaction data, can we see all the data that is available in the file? Okay. Along with that, let's see with the config. So this dictionary, again, config is a dictionary that is containing key value pair. Orchestrator queue name is June framework sample. So just hit on step into. Okay. Bulk add queue items. It's throwing an error. Let's see output. Bulk add queue items. This particular key name is not available. Let's see why. Add. Now this is added. Let's try to retry this one. Step into. Now this is completed and bulk add queues. So June ReFramework view transactions. So if you see view details, file name is the key and E is the value. Here view details, file name A, that's it. So all the rows are added to Orchestrator. using bulk add queue items. I will tell you the difference between bulk add queue items and add queue and add transaction item tomorrow. So these are the important things that will be asked in interviews. 16th, 17th June 2022. But if you possible, you get me the differences. Bulk add queue items, add queue item, add transaction item, get items, get queue items, set transaction item. Okay, so these are important things. So just go ahead and get the details of all these and why these are used. Okay, but for now we have these items. Now what exactly will happen? If you go back, step into, I'm just going back to the flow, and this is the call stack that I have. See, first run executed, general business process, initialization, load configuration, first run. And let's go into get transaction data, have a breakpoint over here. Continue. So here, is it successful or does it have a system exception after initialization? What do you see? Is it a system exception or is it a success initialization? So how can you say, Rishi, this is not a system exception, this is a successful exception, successful message? How can you say that? So if you observe this particular successful state in the properties, system exception is not nothing. If you see, system exception is null. If you have some data in this, then it will go to end process. Now, since there is no exception, that is the reason it is going to get transaction data. Okay, so here you can see stop get transaction data, retrieve data is what you're seeing, get transaction data. So from general business, if it is going to get transaction data, it means that there is no system exception in the initialization state. Step into. So getting transaction data, let's continue. So here, what are we passing in? We are sending in only one item, or you can just say the queue name, Orchestrator, config we are sending, and the out will be queue item. Just remember that out is queue item. Open workflow, step into, step into, step into. So out of this get transaction item, we are going to get, or orchestrator will send one item. Okay, so that is transaction item, and here is our transaction item, out transaction item. See here, queue name is June, reference is nothing, and object is first name. So we are going to have it in first name, and that will be in specific content dictionary from the queue. So whenever, as soon as it picks up the item, if you just refresh, this will be in progress state. All the other items are still in new state. The reason being they are not picked yet by any other robot. So let's continue. So now from here, where will it move? There are two stages. Okay, two transition lines. Is it get transaction data? Will it move to end process or new transaction? Please reply fast. From get transaction data, now will it move to process state, or why will it move to process state? Poonam is saying end process. So Poonam, you're wrong here. End process state is correct. End process state is wrong. Process is correct. Okay. The reason being, so what is the logic here? From get transaction data, if you have a transaction item, if you see in the output, or you can see in the locals, just checking with the local, there is no local for now. So if you observe, transaction item is a queue item, it's not empty. Okay, so this is having some value, and if you have some value from get transaction data, it will go into process state. It will not go into end process. If there are no data, or if the data is empty, only then it will go into end process state. Guys, did you get it correct? Okay, if it is success, then move to process state. Yeah, this is successful. What is how can we say it is successful? Because we have a new item to process. Let's open transaction data, try open workflow. So here we don't have any activity, but let's continue. Okay, so started the process, step into continue. Now again, after completion of that particular item, it again went to fetch a new item, but our requirement is to have the data outside or as an out message. Here, let's stop it. So in our process, we have log message. Okay, so this log message goes into process workflow. And here, this has an input called in config and in transaction item. So in transaction item dot specific content of, so we need to give the key name. The key name is, if you open this one, view details, this is the key. Okay, so this is the only activity we are doing for the complete process. And how many places did we change or write the code? Only 3 places we have written the code. In the first run, we have added code to read the range and add the items to Orchestrator queue, and in process state, just add the code. So the best thing about ReFramework is you need not worry about the logics, you need not worry about if conditions, you need not worry about the failures. Everything will be handled. All you need to see is how you are writing your custom implementation code, nothing else. So if you just click on close and if you just refresh, so how many do we have? 10 items. Okay, in that one is successful. Now if I run this bot again, will we add more items to Orchestrator queue, or will we continue to execute from the next item? What will happen? And this is wrong, because since we are starting again from the beginning, it will add it will execute the first run again, because we are starting the code again. It will execute the first run and it will add bulk add queue items. Step into, and now again if you see, this will add 10 more items to orchestrator queue, or 9 more items. So altogether we have 18 items. So we should have a control on how to add the items, that we'll see later. But if I stop now and if I restart the bot, again we will have the items added up to orchestrator. Okay, now what I'll do, I'll just run the file and have output in place. So if you can see here, the items are coming like this: S, D, F, G, H. Just see, the best way to check with the executions is, if we are able to understand the execution with the code or with the logs, then you have written the best code. Transaction successful, getting a transaction item, transaction started, processing the transaction number, process started and some output is available, transaction ended, transaction is successful, and getting next item. So if you just see in the logs, you are able to get every step that it is happening. So you, instead of looking at the code directly, you can directly see in the logs and you can get all the values. Okay, now you will be able to complete all the items to success state. Okay, I'm stopping it till here, but if you observe, we have written those 3 activities at 3 different places, 2 in one in first run, and we have added bulk add queue items, and in the process we added the second activity to log message. Other than these 2, we haven't written anything. But even though we haven't written anything, every step is handled, every exception is handled. We can see what are the exceptions and how to add custom exceptions. Everything is inbuilt. So that is the reason ReFramework will be very useful while we are working with projects. Okay, so I'll stop the meeting now. Were you able to understand or were you not able to understand? Please